The car hit 80 kilometers before anyone in the back seat had time to scream. "They're closing in," Yemi shouted into the rearview mirror, her knuckles white on the wheel, jaw locked, eyes already calculating the gap between the concrete barrier on the left and the black SUV swinging sideways across the road ahead. Choi Seon-woo grabbed the door handle from the back seat. "Stop the car." I said stop the. Get her head down. Her voice didn't shake. It never shook. "Now, who do you think you are? I'm the person keeping you alive in the next 60 seconds. Down." He went down. She cut the wheel hard left, dropped 2 gears, and sent the limousine screaming into a service passage so narrow the side mirrors kissed the concrete on both sides. Behind them, the black SUV tried to follow and scraped itself sideways against the channel markers, spinning out in a cloud of rubber and rage. 3 weeks earlier, Yemi Adeyemi had been standing outside a glass tower in downtown Seoul in a blazer that didn't belong to her, praying the woman at the front desk wouldn't look too closely at the coffee stain she'd scrubbed off the left cuff and prayed about all night. 3 weeks. And now she was the only thing between one of the most powerful men in South Korea and the people trying to make him disappear forever. How she got from that lobby to this road, and what she was about to uncover at the end of it, is the kind of story that only makes sense once you've heard all of it. So stay with this one, because escaping the ambush was only the beginning. Her name was Yemi Adeyemi, and the morning she walked into Hanjin Holdings, she had exactly 40,000 won in her account, an overdue school notice on her phone, and the kind of silence in her chest that single mothers learn to carry without letting it show on their face. Seoul had never been the plan. The plan had been Lagos, then London, then a military career that made sense for a woman who had always been too restless for ordinary things. What she hadn't planned for was falling in love with a Korean-Nigerian investigator named Marcus, building a life in a city that felt like borrowed time, and then losing him to a case that never closed before she'd had the chance to come home and hold him one last time. She had been on deployment when it happened. She came back to a funeral and a 7-year-old daughter named Sola, who had started calling her the phone lady, because that was all she'd been for most of her short life. A voice through a screen. A promise that kept getting extended. The day she handed in her uniform, she made herself one rule. She was not going to be someone who only came home sometimes anymore. That was 4 years ago. Since then, she had driven for a rideshare app, picked up weekend security shifts at a hotel in Itaewon, and learned to stretch a budget the way her mother had taught her, with both hands and no waste. Sola needed new shoes before winter. The school balance was 3 weeks overdue. And the listing for this chauffeur position at Hanjin Holdings had offered more money in a month than Yemi had made in 2. So she borrowed the blazer from her neighbor, and she showed up. The waiting room was full of men in tailored suits. The kind of men who looked at her once, decided she wasn't competition, and went back to their phones. Yemi had spent 11 years building a career on being underestimated. She was comfortable. A woman in a sharp navy suit called her name, and led her to an underground vehicle bay where a man with cropped silver hair and the stillness of someone who had spent decades reading people stood waiting beside a black sedan. He introduced himself as Deputy Director Han, head of protective operations for the Choi family. "Standard assessment," he said. "Open the rear door, confirm the route, and we're done." 5 minutes, maybe less. Yemi didn't move toward the door. Instead, she walked the full length of the car first. Han's expression shifted barely. "Is there a problem?" "Not yet," she said, checking if there is one. She crouched at the rear tire, ran 2 fingers along the seam where the trunk met the bumper, and then opened the trunk without being told to. It took her under 2 minutes. "This run-flat insert expired 10 months ago," she said when she stood up. "If that tire goes at highway speed, whoever is in this car has no backup plan. I'm not moving until it's replaced." Han studied her for a long moment. Behind him, a younger staff member looked at the floor, clearly embarrassed that routine inspections had missed something this basic for almost a year. "We've had 6 interviews today," Han said slowly. "You're the first person who has touched the trunk." Yemi shrugged. "The parts nobody checks are usually the ones that get someone killed." That was the moment the elevator doors opened, and Choi Seon-woo stepped into the vehicle bay. No entourage. No flashy watch. Just a man in a charcoal suit with the quiet exhaustion behind his eyes of someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks. He ended a phone call, looked at the small gathering around the sedan, and asked why there was a delay. Yemi answered before Han could open his mouth. Because the spare tire in this vehicle is unsafe, and I won't drive anyone anywhere until it's replaced. If you want to make your meeting, that's the fastest way to make it happen. Sean blinked. Nobody on his staff spoke to him quite like that. Flat, direct, no apology woven into the sentence. You always slow things down like this? He asked. Somewhere between irritation and something that might have been curiosity. Only when the schedule is moving faster than the safety margin can survive, she said. There was a pause. And for the first time that morning, Sean almost smiled. Fix the tire, he told Han. And then he turned and walked back toward the elevator without another word. By the end of that day, Yemi had the job. She called Seoul's school from the parking garage that same afternoon and told them the overdue balance would be cleared by Friday. She remembers the exact sound of Seoul's voice when she picked her up later, asking whether this meant they could stop checking the banking app every 5 minutes. She told her yes. She hoped it was true. What she didn't know yet was that this job wasn't going to be about checking tire pressure and confirming routes. It was about to pull her back into a world she had spent 4 years trying to leave behind the day she handed her uniform. The first 2 weeks were almost peaceful. Yemi learned the rhythms of Sianwoo's world quietly, the way she had once learned the layout of a building before a mission, without ever announcing she was paying attention. She noticed which executives lingered at pickup, hoping for 30 seconds of FaceTime with the boss. She noticed how often Sianwoo's uncle, a man named Jang Byung-soo, scheduled last-minute meetings during the exact hours Sianwoo was supposed to be unreachable, always with the tight, overcorrected politeness of a man trying very hard not to let anyone see the pressure he was carrying. She noticed Deputy Director Han's assistant, a man named Ko Daemin, adjusting the parking garage cameras more often than maintenance required. His hands moved too quickly, like a man checking his own work, because he was afraid of what would happen if someone else checked it first. She said nothing. Not yet. A woman who spent 11 years in classified deployments learns early that staying quiet is what keeps you employed. Then one evening, waiting in the underground garage, she was on the phone with Seoul's school about the outstanding balance, voice low and careful, when she caught Sianwoo's eyes in the rearview mirror. She hadn't heard him walk in. Nothing, she said to him, and ended the call. He said nothing either, but something in the way he didn't look away told her he had heard more than she'd intended. 8 days later, she saw the car. A dark sedan, parked across from Hanjin Tower after a late board dinner. Cracked side mirror. Driver sitting just a little too still behind the wheel. She had seen the same car that morning outside a private breakfast on the opposite end of the city. Once is nothing, she told herself. Twice is worth remembering. 3 days after that, the same sedan appeared outside a private members club in a completely different district. 3 times it stopped being a coincidence. She logged everything that night. Timestamps, locations, a partial plate number. She brought it to Deputy Director Han the next morning. He read through her notes with the polite patience of someone who didn't quite believe her yet. Executives like Mr. Choi attract this kind of attention constantly, he said. Competitors, journalists. The plate traces back to a rental company. No flags. She thanked him and said nothing else. But that night, she made a decision on her own. The following morning, without telling anyone in advance, she rerouted Sianwoo's 9 o'clock meeting along a path no one on staff could have predicted. The dark sedan was already waiting at the alternate exit. There was only one way that was possible. Someone with access to the route had passed it along. She told Sianwoo directly that afternoon. Same steady tone she'd used for a status report. That car has followed us 3 times this week on 3 different routes, she said, including one I changed without telling anyone. I don't think that's a coincidence anymore. Sianwoo was quiet for a long moment, watching her in the mirror. What do you need to find out for certain? He finally asked. I need to inspect the car tonight, she said, without anyone on staff knowing in advance. If they've been tracking our location, I'll find it. He didn't ask why she suddenly sounded less like a driver and more like someone trained for exactly this kind of work. He simply nodded. Do it. That night, in the lower level of the garage, Yemi worked beneath the limousine with a magnetic detector she'd bought that afternoon in cash. 22 minutes in, her hand brushed something that didn't belong. A small sealed unit mounted just above the rear axle, transmitting quietly on a frequency that had nothing to do with the car's factory systems. She held it under the garage lights and felt something cold settle in her chest. The particular and familiar feeling of confirming a threat you had hoped was nothing. When she brought it to Director Han, his expression changed for the first time since she had met him. "This wasn't placed by accident," he said quietly, turning the device over in his gloved hands. "Whoever did this had access to this bay. That means it's someone on staff." Neither of them said a name out loud. Not yet, but they both had a short list, and Ko-Daemin was on it. It was Han who found out the truth about who Yemi really was. Standard procedure, he told himself. A deeper background check on anyone this capable, working this close to the family. What came back stopped him cold. 11 years in naval special warfare. Multiple classified deployments. An honorable discharge she had requested herself after declining a reinstatement that would have meant another full year away from a newly widowed household. He brought the file to Seon-woo without comment, set it on the desk, and left the room. Seon-woo found her that evening by the car and asked her about it directly. "No solfaning, no preambid. You were a naval commando," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "I was," she said. "It wasn't relevant to the job, so I didn't lead with it. I listed it on the application because leaving it off entirely would have been a lie. There's a difference. Could you protect me if it came to that?" he asked. "Having the capacity and having the authorization to use it are two different things," she said. "You already have a security team for that. I'm your driver." He studied her for a moment longer than necessary. "Then why does it feel like you're the only person in this building who noticed something was wrong before it became a problem?" She didn't have a clean answer for that, so she gave him the true one instead. "My husband was a federal investigator," she said quietly. "He worked smuggling cases for years, including one that never closed before he didn't come home from it. I was on deployment when it happened. I came home to a funeral and a daughter who barely recognized my voice on the phone. I decided that day I wasn't going to be someone who only came home sometimes anymore." Seon-woo didn't say anything right away. For a man who ran one of the largest companies in the country, he seemed to understand that some silences are more respectful than words. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me," Yemi said. "I'm telling you because you asked a direct question and you deserved a direct answer." He nodded slowly. Something between them shifted, quiet and unspoken. The kind of trust that doesn't announce itself. Neither of them knew yet that somewhere across the city, a phone was already being prepared. One that would arrive at exactly 9:17 that night. Calm and unhurried. The voice of someone who believed they were making an offer rather than delivering a threat. Yemi's phone rang while she was tucking Sola into bed. She stepped into the hallway to answer, expecting the school, expecting anything except what she actually heard. A flat, masked voice on the other and told her to keep Friday's route exactly as scheduled. No deviations. No warnings to anyone. And her daughter would never have a single reason to know that anything had happened at all. The line went dead before she could respond. Yemi stood frozen in the hallway for exactly 3 seconds. Then she walked to Sola's door, pushed it open just enough to see her sleeping peacefully, completely unaware of how close danger had just come to her world. And she finally let herself breathe. She had survived ambushes. She had pulled people out of situations no one was supposed to walk away from. But nothing in 11 years of service had prepared her for the particular kind of fear that comes from a threat aimed at your child. She wrote down every word of the call before she could forget a single syllable. Then she made her decision the way she always did under pressure. Fast, with the next 2 steps already mapped out before she moved. She called Director Han before sunrise and requested a restricted schedule protocol for the rest of the week. No advance notice of Seon-woo's movements beyond 3 people. Herself, Han, and one administrative contact they both trusted completely. Han didn't ask why. He agreed. When she explained to Seon-woo an hour later, laying out exactly what the masked voice had said, he sat very still. The way a man sits when he is doing math he doesn't like the answer to. "Someone threatened your daughter," he said slowly, "to control what I do on Friday." "Yes. And you're still planning to drive the route." "I'm planning to be ready for whatever happens on that route," she said. "That's different." He offered immediately to move Sola to the family estate for the week. Full protection detail, around the clock monitoring anything she needed. She could tell he meant every word. She turned it down anyway. That's exactly the response they're hoping for, she told him. Fear that makes you shrink your world down to something smaller and easier to control. My daughter doesn't need a fortress. She needs her life to stay exactly as boring and ordinary as it was yesterday. That's how I keep her safe. Sean studied her for a long moment. You're the only person in my life, he said quietly, who has ever turned down something I was offering because it was the wrong kind of help. She said nothing. She wanted to check the tires one more time. Friday was coming. Friday arrived gray and quiet. The kind of stillness that always feels louder than it should. The convoy assembled at 7:30. An advance car ahead, the limousine in the middle with Yemi behind the wheel and Seoul in the back, and a trailing vehicle under Code Damon's command. 40 minutes outside the city, the advance vehicle suddenly veered off the planned route, its driver reporting an incident ahead over the radio. The transmission cut to static halfway through the sentence. Not weather static. The deliberate, clipped silence of a signal being killed. Yemi's eyes moved between the mirror and the road ahead. A dark SUV had closed in from behind, riding far too close for a civilian vehicle. Ahead, a second SUV was angling out from maintenance pull-off, sliding sideways to block both lanes at once. Stop the car, Seoul said, voice steady. The voice of a man used to solving problems through calm authority. Yemi didn't stop the car. Get down and stay down, she said. Nothing in her tone left room for argument. She cut the wheel hard left and reversed into a narrow service road half hidden behind a drainage barrier. A route that didn't exist on commercial maps, but had shown up clearly on the tidal access charts she'd quietly requested from a Coast Guard contact 3 days earlier. Just in case. The SUVs tried to follow and scraped themselves against the concrete channel markers, spinning out in a fury of rubber and steel. The limousine bounced hard over the rain-soaked surface. Seoul stayed pressed below the headrest exactly where she told him, without a single question, which told her everything about how far his trust had come in 3 short weeks. She cut the vehicle's GPS signal, reached beneath the seat for a small satellite beacon she had hidden there days earlier registered to a contact entirely outside the company network, and drove. 3 miles down the access road, she pulled into a decommissioned checkpoint structure near the coast, parked out of sight, and finally exhaled. Are you okay? She asked, turning to check him. I'm fine, Seoul said, though his hands were shaking as he said it. How did you know that road existed? I make it my business to know the way out of a place before I ever need it. It was in that dim checkpoint room that Yemi noticed his phone running unusually warm in his pocket. She ran a quick diagnostic and found spyware authenticated through a certificate belonging to the company's own internal security system. Someone inside your security team put surveillance software on your personal phone, she said, holding the screen up so he could see it. The certificate is 3 weeks old. Seoul stared at it. That's around the time Code Damon joined the protective detail full-time. They spent the next 90 minutes in that small room laying out everything they each knew, the way 2 people piece together a puzzle when neither one has all the corner pieces alone. Seoul explained the corporate side. His uncle, Jang Byung-soo, had been pushing a sale of the company's shipping terminal in Bukang Port to a buyer whose ownership traced back through 4 shell companies to an address nobody could explain. The price offered was far below actual market value. Low enough that the real value being purchased couldn't be the terminal itself. It's the containers, Yemi said slowly, putting it together out loud. Whoever buys that terminal gets to move whatever they want through it without anyone asking questions. And if I disappear for 48 hours, Seoul added quietly, the company charter allows the board to hand emergency authorization to the next ranking executive. My uncle has been collecting board commitments for 6 weeks. Yemi looked at him steadily. This was never just about getting you out of the way for an afternoon. They need you gone long enough to make the sale happen and damaged enough afterward that nobody questions how it happened. The backup radio crackled to life. Director Han's voice, compressed and low. Don't contact local police. Co-controls that channel. I've been locked out of the main system. 3 of our protection team were sent 20 minutes away chasing a fake emergency call. KO's already filed a report claiming the limousine went off the road and your status is unknown. Yemi verified Han's identity through a prearranged challenge phrase before she said another word. Then she turned to Seonwo. We're not going back to the estate. We need somewhere with its own jurisdiction, away from anything Ko can touch. She knew exactly where that was. Years earlier, during a search and rescue exercise along the coast, she had worked alongside a Coast Guard officer named Park Jun, who had told her that certain situations called for a person rather than a department. She hadn't used that number once in 4 years. She used it now. They reached Park's outpost using a borrowed maintenance vehicle and a tidal access route that didn't appear on any standard map. At the station, Seonwoo recorded a video statement on Park's secure tablet. He was alive. He was in voluntary contact with law enforcement. The convoy had been compromised from the inside. Any board decision made in his absence would be challenged the moment he returned. The footage was sent through an encrypted channel to the company's independent legal counsel, along with everything they had pieced together overnight. By morning, the story had already leaked to 3 financial news outlets. The version in circulation claimed Seonwoo's newly hired driver, a woman with an undisclosed military background, had isolated him from his security detail. A compensation document had supposedly been recovered from an abandoned vehicle, made out to her, and signed for ensuring his unavailability. Yemi read the headline on Park's tablet and felt something settle in her chest that wasn't quite anger. Something colder and more useful than that. They're not just trying to remove you anymore, she told Seonwo. They're trying to make sure that even if you survive this, nobody trusts you enough to let you keep running your own company. Seonwoo's jaw tightened. Then we go in through the front door. If I show up looking like I'm hiding, that confirms exactly what they're saying about me. The board meeting had been moved up 12 hours overnight. Notice issued at 3 in the morning, while Seonwoo was still sitting in a checkpoint with an emergency lantern for light. When the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, he walked in without hesitation and without performance, carrying a single folder under his arm. Jang Byung-soo stood at the head of the table mid-sentence, explaining to the board that his nephew's disappearance and unstable judgment made it the board's responsibility to stabilize leadership during the crisis. He stopped talking the moment he saw Seonwoo walk through the door. Seonwoo sat down, set the folder on the table, and looked around the room. I understand there's been some concern about my judgment, he said. Let's address that directly. He laid it all out, piece by piece. The tracking device found beneath the limousine and the narrow list of staff with access. The spyware certificate pulled from his personal phone. Ko Damon's falsified incident report compared against Director Han's original route recommendation, quietly overridden. The unsigned compensation document recovered from the abandoned SUV. The legal trace connecting the terminal buyer through 4 shell companies straight back to an account controlled by his uncle's chief of staff. A board member who had served 2 decades cleared his throat and asked carefully whether the board should really place so much confidence in a driver whose background had been concealed from her hiring file. Seonwoo looked at the man steadily. Her application listed her military service accurately, he said. The only people in this room with something genuinely hidden are sitting at this table right now. Jang Byung-soo's composure finally cracked. He insisted he had never wanted anyone harmed, that he had only been trying to protect the company's future, that he hadn't known exactly what methods his partners would use. For a moment, his voice lost the polish it had carried all morning, and what was left underneath sounded less like a man defending a strategy and more like a man who had been quietly drowning for a very long time and had finally been pulled up into the light where everyone could see it. Seonwoo's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. A plan that requires my disappearance for 48 hours and a story afterward calling me unstable isn't a business decision, he said. It's an act against my freedom, dressed up in a suit and called strategy. The room stayed silent. Then the board called a vote. Jang Byung-soo was suspended pending a full independent investigation. The terminal sale was halted immediately. Ko Dae-min was arrested within the hour on conspiracy charges. Within days, the trail connecting the ambush vehicles led investigators to a smuggling network that had been operating quietly through Bukang's ports for years. And for the first time since Marcus had been taken from her, Yemi watched a case connected to that same world actually move forward instead of going cold. She wasn't in the boardroom for any of it. She was 2 floors down, giving a calm, factual statement to a Coast Guard investigator, describing only what could be confirmed through a timestamp, a recording, or a physical piece of evidence. When the investigator asked about her military background, she said her service record was available through the proper channels and that nothing in the last 24 hours had required anything beyond careful driving and careful evidence handling. Sean found her in the hallway afterward. I told the board you acted with my full knowledge and consent at every decision point, he said. They needed to hear that directly from me. Thank you for saying it. Have you eaten anything today? He asked. She realized, almost surprised, that she hadn't thought about it once. That evening, he offered her a permanent position overseeing his personal security. Significant salary, full benefits, enough to clear every debt she had carried since Marcus passed. She turned it down gently, but firmly. I didn't leave the service because I ran out of capability, she told him. I left because I ran out of willingness to live my whole life on permanent standby, missing ordinary moments that don't feel important until you've already missed too many of them. I was deployed for Seoul's first steps. I'm not doing that again, not even for better pay. Seon-woo listened without trying to talk her out of it, which was exactly how she knew he had actually heard her. They settled instead on something smaller, a limited advisory role, a handful of hours each month reviewing transportation and security procedures. Nothing that required her to be on call around the clock ever again. Why did you come back for me on that road? He asked quietly. When you had a clean opportunity to just keep driving. You were in my car, she said. Once someone is in my car, getting them home safely isn't something I clock out of. Is that all I was? He asked. Just a responsibility. She looked at him for a long moment. And for the first time since she had met him, she didn't have a fast answer ready. That's a question worth asking again, she finally said. Once there's no investigation pending and nobody's chasing either of us down a coastal road. He nodded slowly, unbothered by the wait. Fair, he said. Some answers are worth letting the dust settle first. 6 months later, on a quiet Saturday with nothing scheduled, Seon-woo called Yemi directly. No security detail. No notice filed anywhere. He asked if she could drive him somewhere with absolutely no destination attached to it. She showed up in her own car. An old sedan she had spent 4 weekends repairing herself. Nothing like the company fleet. He looked at it for a moment and asked if a man in his position could really be seen riding around in something like that. Safety was never about what the car cost, she told him. He opened the front passenger door, not the rear, and got in without being asked twice. They drove north along the coast, slower than efficient, through the kind of late afternoon light that turns ordinary water into something worth stopping for. I used to think the sealed file was the most extraordinary thing about you, he said eventually, watching the water pass outside the window. The training. The capability. The woman who could put a car through a flooded service road in the middle of an ambush without blinking. And now, she asked. Now I think the extraordinary part was that you had all of that and never once used it to make anyone around you feel smaller, he said. Including yourself. She was quiet for a moment. Getting someone out alive. That part one trained for, she finally said. Nobody trains you for the part after, when there's nothing left to run from, and you just have to decide to stay anyway. Is that what you're doing now? He asked. Staying. Yemi looked out at the water, at the light turning gold over the waves, at a direction that wasn't leading toward another deployment and wasn't running away from one either. Just forward into an ordinary life she had spent 4 years rebuilding, one quiet shift at a time. I think, she said, I finally ran out of places that need me more than this one does. If you made it this far, you already know this story had you from the first second. If it kept you here, hit that like button, drop a comment telling me which moment hit hardest, and subscribe so you never miss the next one. The best one is always the next one.